Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations across time. Conversations across.
Welcome to Conversations Across Time. You may recall that last week we were having a very interesting discussion about Social Security. And I want to introduce our guests who have agreed to return so that we could pick up this discussion again. Seated to my right is my dear friend and co-host, former Pennsylvania State Representative Babette Josephs. And I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize right now because I always slip and call you Babby while we're taping, and please forgive me. Seated next to Babby is fourth President of the United States, President James Madison.
Good evening.
Seated next to President Madison is El Presidente, President Fidel Castro. Welcome.
Good evening.
Seated next to President Castro is the genius of Menlo Park, the man that's responsible for so much that's in our studio and so much technology that we have today, and that is Mr. Thomas Edison. Welcome, Mr. Edison.
Thank you.
Now, when we left last week, we were having a conversation, or actually we were having a rather heated debate with President Madison. President Madison is one of the founding fathers of the United States, person who introduced the 10th Amendment, and for those of you that do not know, the 10th Amendment generally stands for the principle that anything that's not particularly enumerated in the Constitution of the United States means that that power, in fact, is then given not to the federal government, but to state governments. And from that, a lot flows from that. For instance, President Madison is so eager to tell us that the federal government should be involved with the post office, the federal government should be involved with currency, the federal government should be involved with national defense. And it sounds almost as though President Madison thinks that the notions of the foundation of this country have to do with protecting the aristocracy. So I posed a question to him. I wanted him to think about it. And he's had a week. And now we're here. And I want to ask you precisely, what is your position that the United States was formed for? Was it formed for you and your class?
This nation was formed originally from 13 colonies with an agrarian economy. And our intention to be separated from Great Britain stemmed from excessive taxation of our commerce, and thus we have combined the legislatures of the several states combined in a Congress in Philadelphia to form a government and an army that was rise against the incursions of the government in London.
No, okay, but now, given that, I understand, but you know, our discussion is primarily based upon, we want to talk about Social Security. And I wanted President Castro to step in here, only because it sounds to me very much like what you, President Madison, and those of your ilk, and that sounds very demeaning, and perhaps I cannot escape that. It sounds as though you were not concerned about the general welfare and of the people of the United States. And I'm going to hear from President Castro, because I then want to read to you some of the eloquent words from Justice Benjamin Cardozo, who wrote the definitive language and wrote the opinion for why Social Security is in fact legal. But Presidente, please respond.
Thank you very much. What I am hearing from you from what you have said, is that your premise for your government's revolution, for your country's revolution, your countrymen's revolution, was to form a government that had rights for some and not for all. But based on your constitution, it is all about the rights and liberty and freedom and pursuit of happiness. So, how is it that now you've had 5 times more time to develop a social program for your country in the United States, and I quote United States, whereas you don't have a government that serves all the people's needs for your country? So you still have states, but you have a country that serves the purpose for people like yourself only. What do you call yourself, Democrat, Republican, or what do you call yourself? But you're not a united country. And for the sake of health care, what is it that you would say that you can give health care to some and not to all and have a unified country?
Because we do not deem it the proper function of government. The
Federal government.
Of the yes, of the federal government. Thank you.
Sure.
The proper function of the federal government, as I have enumerated, has been national defense, foreign policy, currency, and the post office. The reason we have formed the Constitution in 1787 was due to the weakness of the central government under the Articles of Confederation.
No, President Madison, you are rhetoric. This is rhetoric. Because what you're saying is you have elements that serve elements that are not serving the elements. You have principles to serve the people, but the people don't deserve to get the service that they're set up to get.
It is not the function of the government, in my opinion.
Who is the government?
Excuse me, sir. We do not believe
Excuse
that
me, sir. I just want to stop you, President Madison.
Who is the government?
It's President Castro, just as you are President Madison.
Right. Who is the government? Are you the government? The people the government?
How do you mean define the people? If you mean the people, persons who work in
participate in your revolution.
If the federal government isn't allowed to do anything except the 4 things you enumerated, the military, foreign policy, currency, the post office, I don't see any advantage of the Constitution over the Articles of Confederation, which we got rid of because they didn't make a strong enough central government. And it seems to me that when we did that, what we were saying to ourselves and to history was, yes, our federal government can do lots of things. We can help folks from falling into abject poverty in their old age. We can do that. And we can make sure that everybody has health care coverage. We can do that. And the Supreme Court in both cases said, yes, we can do that. And you know what? That's what we're doing.
Education.
And education.
You can attempt these things if the government is terrorized by a rioting mob outside, as in Shays' Rebellion. However, we do
voting. It's called voting.
What is Shays' Rebellion?
May I just interject? First of all, the problem we have in this, and I'm one of the wealthier people in this country, I admit it. Okay, I don't intend to share my wealth. I worked for it. Whatever I get, I got, and I'm keeping. It's your job as an American citizen to find your way. The people who work for me work for me. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're slaves. I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is that I'm not paying for their health care. I'm not paying for their Social Security. Those are things that you have to take care of yourselves.
I want to ask you this question because it's particularly interesting to me that you, as a businessman, the model that happened when Social Security came into existence was that workers over 65 years old were discriminated against. I mean, you were not interested in hiring the mature worker. You wanted younger workers, and you went through that population, and then you wanted the next group of younger workers. So when you say it's up to you to take care of yourselves, the reality is at 65 years old, people could not find employment. So hence the need for Social Security.
They lived on the farm, and
Exactly.
their family could take care of them, but that doesn't happen very much anymore.
I mean, your case comes about as a result of us switching from an agrarian society where people lived on farms and there was always something for elderly people to do, whether it was that they took care of the children.
Or they didn't live that long.
They didn't live that long, but there was something for them to do, and they were taken care of by their children. Now, I want to give you some statistics that were happening at the time of the case, and that is, and I'm going to read from Justice Cardozo's opinion. A report of the Pennsylvania Commission on Old Age Pensions made in 1919 after a study of 16,281 persons and interviews with more than 3,500 persons, 65 years and over, showed 2/5 with no income, but wages, and 1/4 supported by their children. Now, you remember when we were talking last week, I brought up the fact that people under 30 years of age don't think that Social Security is necessary. But here's what you get if you do away with Social Security. Because when Social Security came into being, those parents were supported by their children. So I want to say to all of you 30-year-olds and under who think that Social Security isn't important, great, because you're going to have your parents to take care of. And once you see that it hits you in the pocketbook, maybe you will understand why Social Security is necessary.
But it has never been, the question has not been brought up whether Social Security is constitutional. And it's not because people don't have that legal thought, it's because politically that's death. You cannot question Social Security because it's in people, it's part of our way of life.
78 years is part of our lifestyle.
It's the pursuit of happiness. You have to have a concrete idea of how you are going to survive for your future, for your present day, and for those who come beyond your own greedy interests.
That may be true, however, that is not the function of the
Wait a
government
minute,
to
it may be true
provide
that
for
people live I just want to understand
assistance
this.
of the elderly.
Wait a
That is
minute,
not the
President
proper
Madison,
function of the
hold on.
government. Yes, madam.
It may be true that people live past the age 65? Is that what you just said? I misunderstood, did I?
I'm stating, madam, that we who founded this country and in founding the Constitution did not put anything in the Constitution that would specify that the federal government had responsibility for the assistance of the elderly. That is unfortunate.
Cardozo found something.
So they should just die.
Cardozo found something.
It is unfortunate, but such is the nature of life in my era.
It's the nature of small vision. It is the nature of no dreams that's beyond
It's
your
a
own
nation of,
small
it's
world.
a vision of somebody who doesn't want his or her country to be effective and strong. Doesn't care whether elderly people who've worked their lives end up on the street because they have no income after they lose their jobs at 65. That's horrible.
Yes,
It's
Ms. Joseph,
beyond
but
humanity.
in your so-called democratic vision, madam, you would have such persons laying on the street to be running the government, and I do not believe that such persons should go near the government. They should rely on persons of education,
President
such
Madison,
as myself.
You do not
trust you.
disappoint. You do
Yes,
not
absolutely.
disappoint.
No.
Once again,
You missed the
once
point.
again, you have your patrician attitude has reared its ugly head. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break, and I'm just going to sit back and let everybody else respond to your notion of superiority. And I'd like you to stay with us. We will come back because, as you can see, there's a lot that we need to discuss. And I want to let the panelists have at President Madison. So right before the break, we were getting around to some confrontations with President Madison. And I must admit that there seems to have been an epiphany that happened on the part of Mr. Edison, and I'd like him to explain that.
Well, I'm persuaded by the panel that the more people that are working, the more money is engendered and given to the federal government, who can do all the things that they're supposed to be responsible for. If you can't protect our citizens, not defensively, but income-wise, so they can enjoy their food, they buy it, we buy from farmers who make money, we buy from importers who make money, we make a lot of our own food, 80% of our food is within the borders of this country. We, at that point, become better and stronger because the money is recirculated and is turned to all the things that we talked about, the post office, the electric lights, very important to me, and many of the things that we do. Now, my friend Henry had the right viewpoint, except it was ensconced in the wrong mind.
Henry Ford, yes.
He did a lot of things for my company that he doesn't even know about, and we're very, very close friends. He created assembly lines for manufacturers, and all of us had to rethink what we were doing, because most of the things that we were doing, electric light bulbs, for example, electric wiring, we did by hand, individually, and it took days and days and days to fill a carton. Well, Henry persuaded me that that was completely wrong, and in fact, he came to some of our plants and made conscious decisions for me about how to control the workers there.
But may I understand this? You're now saying that in listening to President Madison, in listening to President Castro, who in fact, the whole notion of his country is to take care of all of the persons that are within that country.
Everybody.
You're saying that you're rethinking your position in terms of why you should not oppose Social Security?
No, what I'm saying is that Social Security is probably a necessary evil, much the same as universal health care will be in our lifetime.
But doesn't it make you richer to have Social Security?
It makes the
if
country
everybody
richer.
is over 65 can afford a light bulb,
Over 60, 62.
over 60 or
Right.
62 can afford a light bulb.
And they will need it in their lifetime, right?
Doesn't that help you? I mean, isn't
Well,
this
what it's done
in your
for me,
interest?
it has some help, and I would have to say in the big picture, moderate, because they're going to burn out. They're going to have to be replaced.
Right, they keep buying your
constantly,
product.
and that's what they're going to do. And there's going to be more electric
And if
homes
they're in
using
good
electricity.
health, they'll even be more likely to buy your product.
And let me ask you this question, because when we talk about, I keep going back to this notion, because this is what we hear, this heated discussion about young people not wanting to join with affordable health care. That, well, they're healthy, so why should they be paying for people that are sickly? And I keep wanting to state, okay, you don't want to pay for those people that are sickly, but eventually you're going to have to pay, because it's going to end up that they're back, the responsibility is going to be upon you, because these will be your parents who need health care.
Or yourself.
Or yourself.
I like to say this to Mr. Edison. The problem that I see with your conversation is that you are dealing with products and not people, and you are not dealing with the end result of humanity. You are dealing with bottom line, as you say, bottom line in terms of...
Because I have thousands of shareholders I have to satisfy.
Your shareholders are people who will grow old, who will become
Yes.
sick and tired and infirmed and need care. So what happens to your younger people that you will always need, including yourself, when they need help and they need health care? What happens to those people? They're not products, they are people.
Right, but the point being is, and which is why I've completely turned a corner on Social Security, is as a being not opposed to it, but slightly for it.
So
I can't ignore my class.
Yes, exactly.
And I won't.
So let's go to
Yes,
Mr.
I am very
let's go to
familiar
Mr.
with your
Madison
class,
here.
Mr. Edison, a strictly commercial industrial class, whereas I have come from an agrarian large-scale planter class.
We are agrarian.
And we
Cuba
are.
was agrarian.
Yes, but yes, Mr. Castro, but you. but-
President Castro, I keep correcting, just like I have to
President
correct people
Castro-
who
yes,
call
ma'am.
him Mr. Obama when he's
President
President
Castro.
Very
Obama.
small minds.
President, yes, President Castro. Yes, I come from this class. I did have the leisure to study government, and I have been taught to. I have been educated to learn the functions of government, whereas you, Mr. Edison, are primarily seeking profit, seeking the bottom line, and you don't care
wait, you're
anything
not.
about the
You're
functions
not?
of government.
No, which president? Because I'm the president of Edison Electric. And I will tell you that that's not my feeling about this gentleman. My feeling is that when he came in, he overthrew somebody who actually was harmful to his people. And that's why the people supported him completely when he came in that New Year's Eve and took over the Grand Hotel.
And
the Grand
overthrew
Ballroom.
President Batista.
Yeah, and it's happening around the world exactly the same way.
And
It's happening
healthcare
it's happening in
also, and
Syria, it's happening in
Various
Lebanon.
kinds of social security is happening.
And
are
people
happening across
yes,
the world.
And exactly. People are getting closer and closer to healthcare, Social Security, even little things like eye care.
Well,
in
the
Iran,
last Republican president, we had expanded prescription drug medication across the board in a huge way, and they never forgave him the right ring. You probably
but they
would
didn't
never
lower the
forgive him.
prices. He just made it easier for them to market. But those are the people who actually run the country.
Yes.
Are the pharmaceutical people.
The pharmaceutical, big pharma,
The military
industrial
combines.
complex.
They're the ones who govern
And
our
the
lives.
oil and gas
We think we're
folks.
free. I will tell you that we're not. And what our freedom is bought at a terrific price,
Well,
both
one thing that
monetarily
will
and
help,
human.
one thing that I believe will help, the more government supports people so that they're not driven by penury, hardship, and suffering away from the public role, the better off we are. I mean,
And
one
which
of
is
the reasons I'm for health care and I would have been for Social Security, but it was a couple years before I was born, is it helps people confront the questions of the day because they're not sick and poor and on the street.
Now, that is what President Castro managed to do in Cuba.
But let me one point I'd like to make for you. What is Obamacare? Why is it referred to Obamacare as opposed to health care? What is the reference there when you
That
talk
is
about
a racist.
That's a terrific
racist reference, and in fact, what has happened is the extreme right has used it. There are people in this country, President Castro, who wake up every day unable to imagine that there is a black president of the United States, which is exactly why Susan Rice was not made Secretary of State, because there were white people who says we cannot have two black people as the face of the United States. We can't have a black president and a black Secretary of State. And this is, I think that Secretary of State Kerry is someone that I admire. I think he's abundantly qualified. But I also recognize that the reason that Susan Rice is not the Secretary of State today is because there are people in the middle of this country that can't imagine that a black man is the
But
president
there
of the
was
United
no
States.
racism in America for the Constitution. Is that right, Mr. President?
We just counted black people as 2/3. Yeah, that wasn't racism, I suppose. I don't know
I
what
will
it
have to
is.
admit that in my era, when the Constitution was formed in 1787, several 100,000, maybe 1 million or so, African descended people were held as chattel slaves. And
Did you
that
hold
was
slaves?
indeed.
Did you hold slaves, President Madison?
Yes, madam, I have done so, and it weighs heavily on my conscience that I have done so, and as it did with my predecessor, Mr. Jefferson.
And Mr. Washington.
Yes,
Not very heavily, however.
And General Washington, he also, alas, owns human beings as chattel to administer
Well,
his estate.
I don't want us to, first of all, maybe it's my sensitivity. I don't want us to digress into a conversation about the ills of slavery. What I want us to talk about and why we are here is to say that, and I'm happy to hear Mr. Edison come around to another point of view, that Social Security is important, just as we now think that universal health care is going to be important. I think
Is
that
important.
is important. And I believe that what we have to examine within ourselves is, A, how do we propose this to an unwilling populace? Because the right wing has been very successful in telling young people that they should not be registered for the Affordable Care Act. And as we know, young people tend to believe that they'll never be ill. So I want us, if you can take a moment, I want to ask each person for your thoughts on that. And I'll start with you, President Castro.
I say that it is very new. It's a concept, it's a new idea, and people are always resistant to ideas that are new. And affordable health care, not Obamacare, universal affordable health care is going to prove itself to be a necessity for survival of people around the country called the United States of America.
And Mr. Edison?
Well, I almost agree with El Presidente. However, I'd like to take it another step, and nobody's talked about this. Education. Quality of education, the amount of time you spent as a child and to a young adult in education, learning, teaching, whatever it is. That's what's wrong with this country today, is we think we know everything, and we don't. We don't know anything. Because our children are not graduating high school. They're out in the streets. Yeah, we have a black problem, face it, but it's our fault because we didn't teach them anything better. And the parents are too busy taking 2 and 3 jobs to support so they can eat.
So they
and
can
the
get
Republicans
healthcare,
are
for
killing the
God's sake.
stamps. So
Yes.
I was against socialism. I don't know if I'm for socialism or it sounds like I'm for
Yes.
socialism. All I'm saying is that universal health care, unemployment insurance, Social Security, those are the mechanisms to keep this country alive.
And
I'd like to support it with the fourth leg of the chair, and that's education. And if the government spends as much money putting people in jail, spend more on education, we
We'd
might
have
not
fewer
need to
people in
spend
jail.
as much.
And so, President Madison, that brings us right back to you, where we can actually say to you that beyond the 4 reasons that you thought that the federal government should exist, I believe there's some consensus with this panel that federal government is involved in the general welfare of its population. And notwithstanding your 10th Amendment reading and interpretation that the federal government should not be involved, we are more inclined to take care of the less fortunate within our population. And so once again, this has been Conversations Across Time. We find ourselves in the position of there's so much more to be said. At some future date, we will invite the panel back. This is their second time back, but we will invite them back. And maybe we'll have a good report on what is happening with universal health care in this country. Again, this is Conversations Across Time. And for my panelists, my co-hosts, Representative Babette Josephs, and President James Madison, who has condescended to be with us tonight, we appreciate it. And El Presidente, President Fidel Castro, and of course the genius of Menlo Park, Thomas Edison, thank you so much for a spirited discussion about Social Security and the general welfare of our population. Thank you.
Conversations across time. 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 Across